Okay, folks, thanks for joining me. I appreciate your time on a Wednesday night. I have to remember what day it is, at 7 o'clock. I know we've all got things to do, so I started 2 minutes after to give people a chance to join in, and away we go. Some protocols as ever to make sure the process is hopefully seamless and a worthwhile one. It's going to be interactive. You're going to need your phone because we're going to do a Kahoot at the end, and also a sort of word entry piece, poll it near the beginning. Michael will join us in a little bit to moderate the chat. And if you can post any problems in the chat with sound or vid, I'd appreciate that, because I'll obviously keep an eye on it as well. At the end, I'll give some time for questions. Hopefully we'll be about 40 minutes, fairly concise and surgical. And if you request it, I will share the deck and the video recording of the webinar for your own references. So with the protocols in place, one other thing, this is really an endeavor for me both to share some content thoughts, but to master or to continue to try and master some blended learning approaches, which I think will be more common in the future, both with US soccer courses and education generally. So give you sort of 30 seconds to do that, straight into you being active. Try and prioritize the 5 characteristics of what you would consider to be at the core of a great coaching session. So rank them and try and come up with 5, and it's a 30-second gig. We're going to move on because you're going to need to put those responses into the poll-it. The instructions are on the screen. It has been activated, so it should be fine to use. If you can take your characteristics that you noted and put them in the poll-it, that would be great. We're looking for synergy and commonality and any ideas which we think might be slightly outside the box. Just waiting on you to populate the screen. Fun, developmentally eccentric, player-centric. I'm guessing transparent feedback. Lots of movement. Keep going. You know the trend. The more they appear, or the bolder and bigger they are, the more popular the thinking was. Give it another 10 seconds or so. Organized, experiential. Everyone's big on organized. Some people ranking them. Thank you for that. Okay, so let's move on. So let's compare your list. And this was a presentation I did for US Youth some originally 8 years ago or 10 years ago with young Tom Fleck as an observer. So these were sort of negotiated with Sam Snow. And those were the 5 characteristics in order that we came up with. Which, again, I'll share the deck with you, but may be worth considering. Fun and safe has always got to be first, obviously. And this developmentally appropriate piece, which this whole presentation is based upon. And we had a challenging, plays as problem solving. And did you have an impact? So time for you to be active again. Have a bash at defining what you believe developmentally appropriate is. And if you can put those in the chat box for me to look at, that would be great. Type away. I'm observing the chat, looking for some fear. Fear has got no place in this. Mistakes are fine. So just give you general ideas. We've got meeting needs of players by age. Need a bit more interaction. Thank you. Thank you, Bob. Meets the needs of the players and uses correct teaching methodology. Motor skills, psychosocial, good. So we're moving in the right direction. So with those thoughts in mind, we often know it when it's not there. So 3 Irish people at work. Yes, that was politically incorrect, but you can giggle away. When right tools for the right job. So in life, sometimes it's funny. In youth sports.
Oh! Come on, guys, it's getting cold.
Eat this. I wonder if Mom's making.
Look at his nose today.
I know. I wonder if Coach trying to impress somebody. Give me the ball.
No need to milk it. It's a little bit more tragic. And the consequence of getting it wrong, as we know, is fairly dire, because players are bored at practice, they drop out, whole set of reasons why. But I believe if we get things correct in the developmentally appropriate space, which we're going to explore, we can solve this conundrum. Definition. Setting and curriculum, and some of you started to pick this up, that meets the cognitive, emotional, and physical needs of players. Things that we must consider: cognitive development, psychomotor development, psychosocial development. And that was the broad strokes from the old National Youth License for the people who were lucky enough on here to take it. But I think we've got to go a bit deeper. So we'd add a cultural piece if we're going to make it particularly appropriate. We need to perhaps look at individual learning curves and learning styles, and we'll talk about learning styles. And obviously, kids are not empty glasses. They're not empty vessels. Kids at all ages, including some 3-year-olds, have got a cultural piece where they've touched the ball a lot more than many other 3-year-olds. And obviously the emotional piece, which is built into the psychosocial. So we'll look at the definition in a little bit more depth. Setting and curriculum. So let's look at the setting and curriculum. For me, this is the piece that we've got no reason on earth to get wrong. So field sizes, goal sizes, number on the field. And US Soccer helped obviously a few years ago with the PDIs, 4v4, 7v7, 9v9, 11v11. Build outlines to help development. A lot of debate within coaching circles about the size of the 7v7 and 9v9 fields. And that's always healthy debate. But the setting for me should be the easy piece. We've talked, or we've seen all information on skill acquisition, block, random practice. Block practice belongs if you're on your own, not if you're with a group, not if you've got people around you. The equipment, the progressions, and the basic structure of any session for me should be the easy part of developmentally appropriate. This is the piece I believe there's no reason to get wrong. But some of it's a bit more problematic. So let's look at the areas individually. Cognitive development. So some of this you should have researched. You should know about Piaget's theories of cognitive development and Vygotsky. Basically, Piaget argues that you develop cognitive by interacting with your environment. Vygotsky is a social theory that people develop cognitively, and there's zone of proximal development and can move up the more they socialize. So have you studied the learning theories? Are you aware of Piaget? Are you aware of Vygotsky? And then you've got learning styles or learning modalities. So personal story, I used to talk a lot to people about VARC, which is an online learning tool. And you've all been in classes and sessions where you think you've got a kid in front of you who is, as an example, an audio learner. And you talk a lot to that kid. And then you've got a kid who you think is a visual learner. So you do a lot of demos, take a chalkboard, and you've got kinesthetic. I think it's worth realizing that we're learning a lot about learning. So to use the example I just gave, if you look at Doug Lemoff's work on learning modalities, and Doug argues basically that we've all got the ability to change our learning style in different contexts and different teachers. And that at different points in time, we can all be primarily audio, or we can be primarily kinesthetic, or primarily visual. So just an example of I've had to evolve and continue to search for information in the cognitive piece. What does it mean practically to you? Well, it means that you should be concerned about a kid's attention span. You should be concerned if you think at any particular point in time, reading the visual clues, whatever you're transmitting, they're not picking up. Because then are you the sort of coach who can change use of language? Far too frequently we see coaches using inappropriately complex language with younger children. And obviously, use and design of questions, because we want kids to be problem solvers. What level of questions are you capable of designing? And how are you relating that to the learner in front of you? And if you can't get through, you create an environment where players teach players. So, a little bit of research which fits into this space, which I think every coach should have probably looked at recently. The Make It Stick, the Range book by Epstein, and to be particularly current, that's Lemoff's webinar series on virtual teaching, the emblem on the right of Make It Stick. So as I looked at this and I prepared for this presentation, there's lots of papers about how technology is changing learning and the behaviors of learners. And if you've got younger kids and you've seen the way they can learn to play games on phones or on PlayStation, 4-year-olds who can go and turn the PlayStation on, start the game, deal with the levels, I think it would be difficult to argue that learning is not changing, how kids learn. And that can apply a little bit to how we coach, because if you can take the video game example and you can do gamification as an approach, perhaps it's a good example of how we look at this cognitive development. We react as educated coaches and we try and cater to the needs of the individual in front of us. So a little bit of word on the cognitive piece. Psychomotor piece. So physical literacy. As physical education has been removed or reduced in schools, and as some people continue to put kids into one sport categories very young, what is happening with the broad-based physical literacy? And if you connect that with Piaget's cognitive development piece, that they cognitive development develop through more movement and through exploring with the environment, and with our really young kids, are we doing the physical exploration of the field, of the pieces that we're doing? So physical literacy connected with broad-based movement. I think you have to connect this to elite soccer players. Well, there's an enormous piece of research that says elite soccer players have experimented at some point with broad-based movement. So they've learned to move in volleyball, in basketball, in soccer, through playing other sports. That broad-based movement is a piece we have to recognize. Can't talk about physical without the GMO conversation, and diet and sleep. Windows of training optimability is a piece that you should be aware of. Use a personal story to show my ignorance. This was after I'd done a master coach diploma and completed all my US soccer licenses. I have a 23-year-old son who was a soccer player who at the age of 10, I decided I could improve his endurance. So I would take him for 2-3 mile runs. Clueless. At that age, you can't improve the VO2 max of a kid. You can't improve their lung capacity. So we have to know the science so we can do developmentally appropriate things. What does a soccer player look like? I believe this is a red hot topic within America, because how many of you sitting here listening believe that too frequently we're populating our teams with just the big, strong kid and the little engineers of the game, the Messis, etc. we overlook. What does a soccer player look like? And there's lots of studies that I could have shared with you about EPL players generally meeting a specific physical description, certain height, certain build, and I think we have to open up that expansion. SAQ work or ball mastery. This was part of the training optimability discussion. Frequently we get into discussions about when does the physical piece become specific? And is that connected with whether a kid can dribble, has a good touch, is familiar with the ball? What should come first? So you have to be, I think, very careful in these discussions, and probably fits in with your philosophy as a soccer coach. Periodization, incredible as we come off COVID, the amount of tournaments that are out there, just to highlight this point, where kids haven't touched the ball in any sort of organized session. So there's been no team play, and yet people are demanding that they go and play in a tournament on July 7th. First time they've kicked a ball is July 6th. That's part of the periodization. If they're not physically ready and able to go play a game, why are coaches throwing them into games? Psychosocial piece.
Coaching Alliance compiled the top 10 and bottom 10 lists of the best and worst moments in youth sports during that year. 1 year alone, we had a brawl among 8-year-old hockey players. We had the dad of an 11-year-old wrestler who came out in the middle of a match and threw his son's opponent off the mat. We had a lacrosse coach who punched a 13-year-old player in the face. We had a dad who was convicted of giving his son steroids and human growth hormones to try to help lower his speed skating score. And then we had a woman who was so angry at her daughter's performance in a soccer tournament that she actually got a ticket for forcing her daughter out of the car and leaving her on a highway in the middle of nowhere. Now, recently we had the ultimate tragedy. Ricardo Portillo, a soccer official in Utah, died after being hit in the head by a teenage soccer.
Okay, so you've all seen the vids, and you've all got your own horror stories. And at one point, I was going to have you in breakout rooms sharing your worst horror story about youth sports and the sort of moral, ethical piece that we're dealing with. First question for you to consider: are you a holistic coach or not? So knowing that you understand what an holistic coach is, where we put people development before soccer development, where do you fit in that? And then if you do decide you're a person first coach, it's just like the cognitive piece. What have you decided to learn about stages of moral development? So I mentioned Kohlberg. Kohlberg is the godfather of moral development research, but Piaget also did his piece, and Piaget's moral development piece fits in with his cognitive piece. People go through stages. What's slightly interesting and worthy of note is in cognitive development, bar some special needs piece, everybody reaches hypothetical thought. What if? Not true with moral development. Adults don't always reach the final stage of moral development. I would suggest you do a bit of research. I'll give you a reference from a great book, which is How Good People Make Tough Choices by Kidder. I'll put in the notes when I share it with you, but what are your core values? Are you a role model? And just before we move on, the role model piece. So I teach a lot of courses, and I can tell you that with United Coaches Premier Diploma and Advanced National Diploma, there's an ethics piece. 90% of the coaches who go through that piece or have been through that piece in the last, I'll say 5 years, believe things like diving is okay. To a degree, berating opponents, as you play was okay. Where is the moral compass? What core values are you promoting? How would you promote them within your sessions? I think that for me is all part of the psychosocial piece. So other things that we have to consider if we're going to plan effective sessions, previous experiences. This for me was the big missing part in the National Youth License. So we used to talk about cognitive, psychomotor, psychosocial, but there's a cultural piece, isn't there? if it's going to be developmentally appropriate, if I've got a Brazilian 5-year-old who's played soccer from day one, probably what they come to a field with at 5 is slightly different than a young American kid whose dad is in the NFL, who touches a soccer ball for the first time at 5. So this leads to a discussion on readiness. Readiness is defined the developmental age where certain skills can be mastered, and that is definitely dependent upon the 3 arenas we've discussed, but also the amount of time they've spent with the ball. I think to a degree we're all guilty of when we meet a new team that we're working with, it's just an empty vessels. We go with a session in mind, regardless of what the kids can do. So perhaps each season, we should be doing a recap. Where are you now? You're not with them 24/7, 12 months of the year. I'm sure they've got other athletic and soccer experiences that you should be considering. So part of the vid, when we looked at what wasn't developmentally appropriate, we're back to the no drill thing. And this is a bandwagon I'm happy to beat and build into any presentation I can. But those are the reasons. Rote learning, zero fun, no decision making, boring. I would think if you haven't researched myelinization, you probably should. Robots can't solve problems, etc., etc. So we've got to get away from the drills at all cost piece. So some guidelines which help things become developmentally appropriate because they fit. As an example, with the 4 through 6 year age, ball each. Kids at that age are very egocentric. They want to spend time with their ball. They don't want to share. So that leads to certain soccer things. Dribbling, solving problems with the ball on my own, creating moves. So these ball player ratios really lend to the cognitive and psychosocial piece, and they build it in. Most 7 and 8-year-olds are just beginning to share. They're beginning to explore with a friend. Therefore, a ball between 2, passing 2-player combinations is most developmentally appropriate. Do you have some 7 and 8-year-olds who begin to understand space? Yes. And therefore, can you do some possession work, 3v1, 4v1? Yes. But without knowing the principles that lead to these things, very difficult to decide on developmentally appropriate content. And a word about banning by ability. And more to consider. Prior learning we talked about. So I'm going to talk a little bit about mixed ability tasks because very guilty most coaches of running sessions which they say are developmentally appropriate, and it's a set progression of practices where kids of lack of ability or at that point can't attain, just can't succeed. So some mixed ability games. That is a clip of a Nintendo juggling ladder. And I'll explain it. Basically, each row of cones is a step on a ladder. So as an example, every kid has a ball each. This would be a COVID safe thing. They can juggle up the ladder, 2 juggles with your laces to get on, 4 juggles in rung 1, 8 juggles in rung 2. You have a flag in rung 3 when they get to 12. And first kid to the top of the ladder wins. Make a mistake, you drop to the bottom of the ladder. So if you think about 12 kids doing that, every kid is working at the level that they can work at. Every kid is challenged to get to another level. Every kid is active throughout. So it's a mixed ability game. You've probably all played this little 1v1 game to 2 cones. You can play it with 2 balls for 2 kids who are brilliant, where the kid trying to score is weak foot only. The defender can use both feet to move his ball. You can play it with 1 ball with the kid with weak foot only. You can play it with 1 ball, kid using strong foot. So how do you engineer the activities you do to make sure that kids of all abilities can play? Simple passing game. where they're either playing a stationary ball, playing with a moving ball, playing at different distances. You can play games with the weight of pass. And gates. We've all played gates games with 7 and 8-year-olds where they begin to share and move with the ball together. And some kids, to use that example again, who aren't socially developed, basically stand still when the other kid moves. But you can make different sizes. You can say that the ball has to be played through the gate for someone to move on to. You can say that a kid can be stationary as it comes through a gate. So how much thought are you putting in to expanding the opportunities for kids within practices and activities by making them more mixed ability? So a few teaching practices that can help. Should practice have a good rhythm? Pre-plan language and questions you will use. Plan so all activities are mixed ability. Can't do mixed ability tasks without having some awareness of cognitive development, psychosocial, psychomotor. We don't spend enough time watching our players. I think any coach I know spends enough time actually acutely observing. Just be quiet and observe. We all feel that we've got to talk all the time. So I wanted to come away with some real concrete ideas that will guide you on being developmentally appropriate. So pulling it all together. You should go around the circle. Just think of how many of these are boxes you can check. If you're planning a developmentally appropriate session, are you considering all those pieces? So a lot of information in a short time, and I wanted to finish with a little bit of fun. So we're going to play a Kahoot. This is where you need your phone. Your Kahoot is now loading. Give me a second. I'm trying to find out what happened because I did check this earlier today and it was fine. Kahoot is now loading. We'll give it a second. We'll try it once more. Okay, so I'm not going to hang on it because a Kahoot is a good, fun, interactive quiz thing. I did do the appropriate planning, I promise you, and checked it today, and it's a Kahoot I've used in the past. So I'm not quite sure why it's not working. But the Kahoot is basically a check for understanding. So it asks a load of questions on what you think developmentally appropriate is and applying it. But we'll solve that problem by using the chat box for questions and allowing you to ask questions. I promise myself I won't get rattled by technology. So I'm going to actually, we'll use the chat box. So if you have a question, put them in the chat box. I'll let you ask it. I'll unmute you and we'll explore your question. We'll do that for 5 minutes and then we'll call it a day. So chat box, post questions. I'm monitoring the chat box. Okay, so while you're thinking about asking a question, I'll give you a takeaway activity, an action step. So the action step would be this: based upon the content of this webinar, whether it be cognitive development, psychosocial, psychomotor, or the cultural piece, which one of the 4 arenas do you feel that you've got the least knowledge in? Because your action step is to go away and explore it. If you need to go and look at the theories of Vygotsky and Piaget to get on top of the cognitive piece, then hey, go for it. If you never looked at Kohlberg and looked at the moral development piece, so on, the GMO piece alone is worth some research for the physical piece. So there's your action step. Take some of the content ideas, go and explore, take an area of weakness or something that you've not looked at in depth, and that make it a strength so that you can be more developmentally appropriate in the future. Okay, no questions came in, so I'm only left to thank you again for your time. I will share, as I say, if you email me, I'll share all the content, and it's probably worth sharing so that you can play the Kahoot, because I've no doubt as soon as I click off, it'll all work. Thank you all for your time. I appreciate it. Bob, great to see you. John, etc. Thanks very much. Have a great
Thanks, Tim. Cheers, mate.
Thank you, Tim.
Pleasure's all mine.
Thank you, Tim. That was great.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you. Thanks, Tim.
I don't want to do Brandy because he's trying to tell me.